Hello and welcome to the Rawfork podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Marinabuksov, and I'm a functional medicine pharmacist in New York, as well as an integrative health coach and clinical herbalist. I'm pleased to go into season 3 of this podcast and continue to bring on other holistic minded pharmacists, as well as healthcare professionals to the show. I'm constantly inspired by my guests and their stories and love sharing their points of view with you all. Hi, everyone. I have a very special guest today. We have Dr. Rachna Patel. She's a physician and she specializes in cannabis, among other things. So I'm just going to let you introduce yourself. Just please tell us something about your background, maybe where you grew up and went to school, and how you became a doctor.
Sure. So I grew up in Jersey, so I'm a Jersey girl at heart. And then I headed out to the Midwest for undergrad at Northwestern. And then I went even further west to California for medical school. And I started off in emergency medicine, but I made my way into cannabinoid medicine back in 2012. So my background is in emergency medicine, but I never actually practiced. I was going through training and was frustrated, to put it lightly. As I think as every med school grad, you graduate bright-eyed, wanting to impact people's lives. And what I found was that, as an ER doctor, what do you mainly do? You essentially treat pain. People come in with headaches, they come in with back pain, they come in with abdominal pain. And as you know, we rule out the emergent cause, and we send them home on their way if there's no emergency, with instructions to follow up with their primary care doctor and with a script for typically pain medications, opioids. And oftentimes, given the nature of our healthcare system, a lot of these patients would come back into the emergency room saying that, the opioids didn't work, they're experiencing side effects from the opioids, or in the worst case of scenarios, I would be in the unfortunate position of having to resuscitate patients who either intentionally or unintentionally overdosed on these medications. Wow. And so I felt like, I was standing at a revolving door, handing out these prescriptions on the one hand, and then dealing with the problems from these medications on the other hand. And it was like, okay, I'm not really making the impact that I had thought I would be making. So one sleepless night in residency, every night is sleepless in residency, but one sleepless night, I was just surfing Craigslist because I was doing some virtual dumpster diving. Honestly, I needed to furnish my apartment. And I happened to click on the section that said health and medical. And that's where I happened on an ad that said medical marijuana doctor needed. And I had no idea before that this whole specialty had even existed. So I started exploring. I hung out on PubMed, and I dug into the research, read research study upon research study. I also looked at the business side of it as well. How are these doctors practicing, and where are they practicing? What is the nature of their practice like? And about a year later, I was very compelled by the data that I had found. It was preliminary, but I was still compelled by it, especially when it came to chronic pain. We have great options in Western medicine for acute pain, but we don't have very many good options when it comes to chronic pain. And I think that's where herbal medications really sort of take the cake. And so that's where I was convinced. I had read this research study led by Dr. Donald Abrams. He's an oncologist based out of UCSF. And it was a pilot study where they had HIV/AIDS patients who were struggling with neuropathy. And they were already on a regimen of opioids, and they had added marijuana to their regimen, and they had them inhale it, not smoke it, but vaporize it rather. And overall, what they found was that in these patients, they were able to reduce the doses of opioids that they were on. And when the cannabinoids were combined with the opioids, the patients experienced greater pain relief. And so it's one thing to have the book knowledge. As a clinician, it's really important to have the patient knowledge as well, right? So that's when I signed up to work at a medical marijuana clinic out in California, and this was in 2012.
Wow.
So yeah, and there's been no turning back since then.
Wow, what an amazing story. So right after residency, you chose to pursue this new emerging field that dealt with novel pain relief with herbal medicine, and in particular with cannabinoid, like the cannabinoids system, cannabinoid, oh my God.
Endocannabinoid system.
Endocannabinoid system. I'm sorry. I'm like, ugh.
It's a mouthful. It's a mouthful.
It's novel. So, and you know, the novel, not the novel, but the piece of medicine that we have to trigger that is cannabis, which is a plant. You know, there are synthetic versions available. So what do you prefer to use, and what did you learn on your journey as seeking like this pain relief and maybe combining different therapies? Like, what is your approach evolved into?
Yeah, so yes, there are synthetics available in the form of analogs and isomers of tetrahydrocannabinol, which is THC. But here's what I found clinically. So I had patients come in, patients diagnosed with cancer, who were prescribed dronabinol, otherwise known as Marinol. And they found that they were experiencing a lot of side effects from the medication as opposed to symptom relief. However, when they used some form of the cannabinoids extracted from the plant itself, in that case, they experience the medical benefits without any side effects. And what may be going on is that, you know, with a synthetic, you just have that one molecule. But with the plant form, an extract from the plant form, not only do you have the THC, but you also have other cannabinoids, right, that the plant makes, right? So we're talking about cannabidiol, cannabigerol. You have acidic forms of the cannabinoids, and then you have neutral forms of the cannabinoids as well. So there may be some sort of synergistic effect going on. And what we know based on research is that when CBD is present with THC, CBD helps to dampen some of the side effects that are caused by THC. So that's what I found from a clinical standpoint, you know, when synthetics versus plant-derived medicine.
So from your first job, what was your role there? What was your experience there? And then how did you move on from there?
Yeah, so basically, I worked at one of those really shady medical marijuana clinics. So essentially my role was to evaluate patients and at my discretion, issue medical marijuana cards, right? Now, it was interesting. I specifically chose California for a reason, because I looked at the rules and regulations in other states that had legalized marijuana at that point in time, which weren't many. But California had, like it always does, had loopholes in its laws. So one was that they didn't have a restricted list of medical conditions. They did have a list of medical conditions, and then somebody managed to sneak in the phrase "and any other medical illness" on that list. So it was up to the discretion of the physician to determine whether or not the patient would benefit from the use of medical marijuana, which was great. That gave me as a physician a lot of liberty to figure out, okay, you know, based on the research, you know, will this benefit the patient or not? I wasn't restricted in terms of conditions, so that was great. Second thing was that patients didn't have to register with the state. So in most other states, the way it works is that you get a recommendation or what's otherwise known as a certification or a card from a physician once you're evaluated. And then you have to submit that paperwork to the state, and then the state issues the final actual certification card, recommendation, whatever it is. In California, it was a physician who issued this this documentation, and then the patient could take that documentation and go straight away to the dispensary. So there was no waiting, and there was no going through the state. Oftentimes, in many cases, the state may ask for additional documentation and whatnot. So that's there's time there that's that it requires. So that was great. I got to see the full breadth of conditions that could benefit with the use of cannabinoids. And some of the more common conditions that I saw which benefited from cannabinoids included chronic pain, anxiety, and insomnia. And if you think about it, the prescription medications for these conditions are some of the most commonly prescribed in the United States, and I imagine throughout the world as well.
Yeah, I can attest to that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I don't know about the rest of the world, but definitely in New York.
Yeah.
That's very, very common. And they kind of all go together, these conditions. They're kind of psychosomatic, the pain, our own endogenous pain signals that we have, and we have our natural opioids ourselves, and then we have our natural cannabinoids that also come into play. And then we have insomnia or anxiety or other kinds of nervous systems, maybe some depression also. All of these are kind of subclinical in the sense that they're patient specific, and if the patient gets to describe the quality of their sensation, the physician can't really tell or measure that other than like pain scales and just other things that are subjective. So, and all of them kind of come together, and I feel like a lot of it is also, I would say, a disease of a societal disease in a way, because people are lonely and depressed and don't have like this community around them or like this livelihood. So then they start to get bogged down with all these like seemingly interesting syndromes like chronic fatigue or chronic pain or other kinds of neuropathies and things like that. So
anxieties like OCD.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And people who are, let's say, living alone or feel isolated tend to be the ones that sense the most amount of pain versus like somebody who may be living in a loving community, and even if they have pain, they might not even go to the doctor. They'll be like, oh, whatever, I have so many other things to do, like, and I have a loving family, and they'll just live with it, and you won't even know that they're in pain.
Yep. Agreed. Totally agree. It's interesting from a cultural standpoint. I remember when I went to go visit family in India, at one point, for whatever reason, everybody in the family was, and this is a big family living in one house. Everybody was doing something, and they had to leave me by myself. And it was such a big deal to them that like, oh my God, we can't leave you by yourself. And I was like, you guys, I've been living by myself for years in America. Like, this is not a big deal. So they're very sensitive to the emotional impact of leaving someone by themselves, especially in situations where a loved one passes. It's important to not leave someone by themselves in that situation. So yeah, it's really interesting how that plays out, and how that impacts like the subjective sensation of pain. Because I worked at a civil hospital in the ER there, and one of the cases I remember, there's this woman who had a dislocated shoulder for like 10 days. And I mean, she didn't even flinch on examination. And it was like, what in the heck? This is insane. Like in America, like in the ER, this person would be like yelling and screaming. So it's really interesting, what you mentioned. And I think there's a lot of truth to it too.
It's so interesting how people's perception of certain things change based on the society and the culture that we live in. And it's so true. I think, sometimes it's like common courtesy to like, come bring a loved one and like show them around or whatnot. And that's part of it too, like being a good host. But then in America, because we're like so spread out and we're all like doing our own thing, like, getting our career goals done, getting this, getting that in a lot of ways, like we function as individuals and not as a community. And that really like translates a lot of times to our
those psychosomatic things like
Mhm.
anxiety over our future or depression about our past. And
Yep.
these things are all interrelated. And I find also that especially women past a certain age, like let's say over the age of 55 or 60, they a lot of times have insomnia and they need to take sleeping medications from the pharmacy a lot of the times. And I just find that that's a patient population that's very prone to insomnia and these kind of issues. So I wonder if you found any correlation with that.
Absolutely. Specifically, peri and postmenopausal women would oftentimes come to my practice complaining of insomnia, hot flashes, and anxiety. And, you know, very, I would say these are very common symptoms of peri and postmenopause. And so, they would turn to cannabis for those symptoms. And also, another common use in that population was cannabinoids in the form of lubricants, not just to lubricate, but also to enhance sensitivity during intercourse. So a lot of that population found that helpful as well.
Wow, that's so interesting, and that makes sense.
Yeah.
So what do you currently practice? What do you use in your practice? How does your practice look like? How have you developed this practice? And what kind of things do you do for your patients?
Okay, so let me pick up where I left off in terms of my journey, because it's evolved quite a bit. So I worked at a couple medical marijuana clinics in Sacramento, started off in Sacramento, like I said, and then moved over to the San Francisco Bay Area for about 1.5 to 2 years. And by that time, I had gained enough capital to start my own practice. Now, the reason why I decided to start my own practice is that these medical marijuana clinics were just mills, There was a lot of pressure from the owners of the clinics to just spend as little time as possible with the patients and just churn out, just give out cards like candy. But what was interesting when I was working in the Capitol was that I saw a lot of attorneys and they were experiencing a lot of anxiety because of the nature of their work. And they had a lot of inquisitive questions. They would ask me things like, sometimes I use the marijuana and it helps my anxiety. Other times I use it and it makes it worse to the point where I feel paranoid. What's going on? Why is this happening? So that's interesting because, based on the research, what I found was that THC being psychoactive, when used in toxic doses, makes anxiety worsens anxiety to the point where it can cause paranoia. So I started guiding these patients on, okay, well, you want to use products that have high amounts of CBD, in this ratio. And at that point in time, laboratory testing was not required, but it had just voluntarily become an industry standard in California. So there would be stickers on the products that told you exactly either in percentage or in milligrams, how much CBD was in the product, how much THC was in the product. So I'd give them very specific instructions on which products to select, and then how to dose those products, and with what frequency to use the products. And they really they got a lot out of this. And so I figured, okay, well, what if I start a practice where I'm actually, unlike all the other, mills, medical marijuana card mills out there, I actually just took the time to inform and educate my patients. I charged a whole heck of a lot more for it, but patients appreciated it because it actually solved their problem instead of them having to guess every time. And then rather than getting information from some, 20-year-old who, speaking based on their own personal experience rather than any medical knowledge. So that's what I did. I started my own practice in 2014, did that brick and mortar until 2018. And by that time, what was happening was that I had started a YouTube channel because it was a one-woman show. Initially, the first year, I was playing Dr. Receptionist. And then I hired a receptionist, and she was getting a lot of medical questions, which she wasn't, she didn't have the background to answer. And a lot of them were the same questions over and over again. And they were almost like pre-screening questions. People would ask me questions like, well, does marijuana work for this? And does it work for that? And in the interest of not wasting my time and not wasting their time, I just created videos to let them know that, for instance, with arthritis, this is what the research says, and these are the results that I've seen in my patients, so that they can get a better idea. And then based off of that, they can figure out, okay, do I want to go see her? Do I not want to go see her? And then that took off, and I was getting questions from people throughout the United States and all over the world. So that's when I transitioned to an online practice. And by that time, and these were consults now I was doing for educational, informational purposes only. And that was made clear. So I had transitioned from essentially a physician to a consultant. And then Penguin Random House approached me to write a book. So did that. And then by the time the Farm Bill had passed in 2018, so by this time I had created my own line of just one SKU of a CBD tincture, a sublingual form of CBD. And I worked with a farmer in Colorado. And at this point, I had realized that, in order for me to make the impact that I wanted to make, I needed to take my knowledge and experience and teach other clinicians and medical professionals, and also I needed capital for more inventory as well. So I knew this, from a business standpoint, but at the same time, I had investors approaching me as well. So it was a matter of partnering up with the right investors who saw my vision. And so now I'm the CEO of Doc Patels, my own CBD products company. And what's great is that my investors are totally and completely on board. We have, I have a psychiatrist who's an investor. I have a dentist who's an investor. So medical professionals, right, who get it. And so that's what I've been working on since the beginning of this year, January 2020. And so we have now an entire line of products that are available in multiple different formulations, from sublinguals to topicals to ingestibles. And I'm working on training medical professionals with my knowledge and experience as well. So that's where I am today. I still do consults as well, but eventually, the way I'm envisioning it, I'm going to have to phase that out so that I can focus more on training other medical professionals.
Wow, that's so great. And what an amazing feat in such a short period of time.
Yeah, although it feels long.
Yeah,
it's been a lot of years, but
yeah, I guess. But it's been like maybe 8 years, but still, that's an impressive amount of progress to research and learn so much about, this one plant that has so many medicines inside of it, and then market it and teach people and connect with patients and create your own line of products. So that's pretty amazing.
Thank you.
Write a book. And what was your book called?
It's called the CBD Oil Solution.
Awesome. Okay, so we'll have that in the show notes for our listeners.
Yeah.
So can you tell me a little bit, so you mentioned the line of products. So is it only CBD, or do you have some products with THC in there too?
So our line has non-detectable levels of THC, 0.00% THC. The reason being, a lot of folks from both consumers to medical professionals get concerned about THC. Mm-hmm. And it's from a clinical standpoint, when it comes to dosing, it's a little bit more difficult to finagle. You have to be a lot more careful with it in terms of dosing, because you can go from therapeutic to toxic pretty quickly. There's less of a buffer. So at this point, we've kept it at 0.00% THC. And also, while treating patients over all these years, here's what I found. Even with marijuana-based products, about 80% of conditions, most patients benefited from high CBD products. So chronic pain, anxiety, insomnia, they benefited from high CBD products. And more specifically, conditions like migraines and headaches, muscle pain, mild to moderate nerve pain, anxiety, and insomnia benefited from high amounts of CBD, whether it's hemp-based or marijuana-based. And when it comes to THC, some of the conditions that are benefited by that, whether it's just high amounts of THC on its own, or whether it's CBD and THC. So that includes things like severe nerve pain, nausea and vomiting, poor appetite, autoimmune conditions, right, like Crohn's disease, psoriasis, rheumatoid arthritis. Those you do need some amount of THC to benefit the symptoms of those conditions. And so because of that fact, and also because of legal access, hemp-based products are much more easily available from a legal standpoint than marijuana-based products. At this point in time, we've opted to stick to 0.00% THC products.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
So from, your story and your journey, I know that you said it was kind of like sheer luck that you stumbled upon this ad, and then that started a whole trajectory. But is there any other reason that you decided to really hone in and focus on cannabis in terms of pain or all the other things that you've seen it help with? Or do you usually tend to turn to cannabis as the cure-all, or do you pair it with other herbs or other types of treatments? Like, how does your whole philosophy work about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's by no means a cure-all. Absolutely not. And I am just a specialist on cannabinoids. I'm by no means a specialist when it comes to other natural alternatives. What my main goal is that for the conditions for which it's effective, especially when it's far more effective than prescription medications that aren't as effective, my goal is to get them on the cannabinoids. So that they are, they have a medication that number one is effective for them, right? They're not, it's not a situation where they've, for instance, with pain, they've tried the opioids, they've tried the antidepressants, then they've tried the anti-seizure medications, and none of it's working. So one, that's effective. Two, they're experiencing little to no side effects, right, compared to prescription medications. And three, there isn't that looming threat of becoming addicted to the medication or overdosing on the medication. So it's really a way to offer a safer alternative for the conditions for which it's effective. There are conditions for which it's not effective, and I usually, straight up tell patients it's not going to help this condition. Okay, like for instance, I've had patients ask me, is it going to help my high blood pressure or my cholesterol? And in which case, it's a pretty straightforward answer. No, it's not going to help, and I would say don't bother. You're going to waste your money and your time. And I know this also just from having treated patients over years and years, following up with them. They'll come in where, they have chronic pain, but they also happen to have either high blood pressure or cholesterol. And we notice over time, it doesn't really have much of an impact on their blood pressure. It doesn't make it worse, but doesn't make it better either. And they have to continue to take their, antihypertensives or their cholesterol medications. So that's my philosophy, that, like I mentioned, that with Western medicine, we don't have a good option when it comes to chronic pain, even when it comes to anxiety, when it comes to insomnia. And this is a much better alternative to that and more effective alternative as well. So that's essentially my philosophy.
So you're essentially offering them like more natural solutions and alternatives that will be less toxic and safer in the long run.
Yeah, exactly. Safe is the word at the end of the day. It's effective and it's safe for folks to use. And what's great about cannabinoids is that they're fat soluble. So essentially, it's a PRN medication in which people can come off of it whenever they need, even abruptly, without experiencing withdrawal symptoms, because you have stores of it and you just naturally wean off of it. So I like that as well, right? Being like, for instance, with SSRIs, once a patient is on it, they have to continue to be on it. And then if they ever want to get off of it, they have to then be weaned off of it, and that can be a process in and of itself. Yeah, exactly. So it's also more flexible medication as well. So it has a lot of benefits, not for every condition, but for conditions like chronic pain, anxiety, insomnia, very effective and safe, and you know, just a much better option than prescription medications at the end of the day. And again, the goal is to impact lives, right? So if I can manage to get patients off of opioids and save lives in the process, then yeah, so be
That's
it.
a win.
Yeah, exactly.
So, over the years in your practice, have you noticed that people generally tend to stay on it for long term, or do some people are some people able to taper off, like you said, and kind of use it for a period of time, then not have to use it anymore?
Yeah, so there's different uses depending on the severity of the condition, right? So a lot of my chronic pain patients will definitely use it on a regular basis. And it's not every day. Usually I tell patients the max that you want to take the cannabinoids is every other day. And that's a max. I've had patients take it, every 2 days, every 3 days, and that's typically sufficient for the rest of the week. So that's like, that's for someone who's in a severe pain on a regular basis. Then, like, say you have a migraine patient who, and they know that their migraines are triggered, for instance, by their menstrual cycle. They can predict when they're going to experience that pain. So in that case, it can be used as a preventative PRN.
Great.
And then let's just take anxiety, for instance, right? So for a lot of people, anxiety is situational. Right now, we're in the middle of a pandemic. A lot of people are experiencing anxiety.
Yeah.
And so in that case, and I actually use it similarly in my own situation where, whenever I have situational anxiety, I'll use it on an as needed basis. But then once that trigger or that stressor is no longer in my life and I'm no longer experiencing anxiety, I stop using it. So it's very flexible in that sense too. It can be used to help with chronic conditions. It can be used as a preventative, and it can be used, I'd like to say PRN, in situational contexts as well. Yeah.
Cool. So where do you see the industry going overall? Like, where do you see the trend going? Because now we have cannabis, it's a hot topic, especially the, CBD products that are now legal. And as long as they have like that certain amount of THC, everybody can pretty much use it safely and effectively. Do you see that trend increasing, and do you see THC also coming into the picture, or maybe some other of the cannabinoids?
Yeah, so I mean, at this point, okay, so let's talk about marijuana. And by the way, I just want to make a distinction between, I've been mentioning these terms, hemp and marijuana, and then let me just make a basic distinction. Yeah. So they're part of the same plant family. The distinction between the two is a legal distinction, okay? And this was actually made fairly arbitrarily way back in the day. But basically, by law, hemp-based products have less than 0.3% THC. And by default, then marijuana-based products have more than 0.3% THC. And that's it. That's the basic difference between the two. So let's talk about marijuana. Marijuana has now been legalized, I believe, and it's like about 11 to 12 states, right? So we're talking about over 1/5 of the states in the US have legalized marijuana for recreational use. So basically anybody over the age of 21 has access to it. CBD products are, being sold by your average Joe Schmo, everywhere. So what's going on is that I feel like what's unfortunate is that the way the industry got its start is, your average Joe Schmo wanting to sell products, and they wanted to make a lot of money, making all sorts of unqualified claims. But now we are getting more and more companies who are getting medical professionals involved as spokespersons. So that's important. And it's an industry in its infancy. So there's a lot of room for influence. And so one of the ways that I want to influence it is get more medical professionals involved, right? So like I mentioned, one of my goals is that, so number one, because it's an unregulated industry, I thoroughly vet our products. And I vet it for, number one, potency. right? So I make sure that the amount of CBD that shows up in the lab test results is within plus or minus 20% of what's on our label, right? So kind of the same difference between brand drugs and generic drugs, which is an acceptable medical standard. Then I make sure that our products have non-detectable levels of THC, so 0.00% THC. I'm testing it for pesticides, and our products are tested at state licensed labs. So usually these labs have a list of pesticides that are required by the state that they have to test for. I'm testing for microbial contaminants, namely E. coli, Salmonella, Aspergillus, because these contaminants have commonly been traced back to the cannabis plant. I'm testing for heavy metals, arsenic, cadmium, lead, and mercury, mainly because the cannabis family of plants are known as bioaccumulators. They tend to soak up the heavy metals in their environment. And so a lot of, these heavy metals can seep into the end product that's made. And then also our products are made with safe and non-toxic solvents like ethanol and carbon dioxide. But be aware that there are CBD products out there that are made with hydrocarbons like butane, hexane, propane, which if left behind and in toxic levels, toxic residual amounts, that can be harmful to the human body. So that's one goal of mine, is to make sure our products are thoroughly vetted. There are products out there where, believe it or not, they'll have like little to no CBD in them, and you're basically just buying an overpriced bottle of olive oil or coconut oil. So that is something to watch out for. And then my other goal with the company is to put the products in the hands of medical professionals. And then not only just to put the products in their hands, but to educate and inform them so that they can then educate and inform the end consumer about these products and how to best utilize them. So that's how I plan to influence the industry with the work that I'm doing. And like I said, it's in its infancy, so there's a lot of room to have influence in the industry.
So are you also putting these products in pharmacies so that they could be sold at the point of sale or over the counter to patients?
Yes, I have been speaking to pharmacists, mainly independent pharmacists, who are looking to bring these products into their pharmacies. And it's great because pharmacists are consulting with consumers anyway. And so this is a great way, if they want, they could potentially even, charge for the consultation. They could not, up to them, but they're helping their consumer make an informed decision. And what's great, what comes out of this is that it's mutually beneficial, right? You're benefiting the patient because it's helping to solve their medical problem, but at the same time, it's also, if you think about it, financially beneficial too, because what's going on right now is that you'll notice there's thousands of CBD brands out there, but there's no market leader, okay? And here's what's going on in the conversations that I have with patients. So they'll come to me and they'll say, I use this brand, and it'll be a product that was arbitrarily recommended to them by the company, or they arbitrarily selected the product, okay? And they'll use it, and it either won't have an effect or they'll get side effects, right? Like headache, for instance, or feeling groggy or tired, which are common side effects. And then they'll be like, okay, well, it's a brand. So then they'll move on to another brand and experience some similar results. But when I was consulting with patients and recommending products to them in my practice, what I found was that once I walked them through how, I recommended a specific product and I walked them through how to use it, they continued to use it year over year over year. And God forbid, the product got discontinued or it was out of stock, then I'd get like phone calls, panic, like, what do I do? So it's financially beneficial to a medical professional because once you teach the patient how to use a product, you now have a loyal customer as well. So that's essentially how I see it. From a business standpoint, I think it's important, number one, to do the work that I do with integrity, but also to create mutually beneficial business partnerships. And the basic foundation of it all is trust. And so, from one medical professional to another, that's essentially what I'm establishing.
Yeah, great. So I remember you mentioning a side effect of getting more paranoid because of the THC content, but I know it's also important to choose the proper strain.
Yep.
So can you talk a little bit about that and how you deal with that in your own company?
Yeah, sure. So with hemp-based, so let's talk about both marijuana-based products and hemp-based products. With hemp-based products, because the effect of the THC is essentially negligible, what you really want to pay attention to is the strength of CBD product, right? And the most common formulation that you're going to find out there for CBD are sublinguals. And that can come in a wide variety of strengths. So typically they come in, the CBD product is made in a 1 ounce bottle, or packaged in a 1 ounce bottle. And the strengths that you'll find on the market range anywhere from 250 milligrams of CBD all the way up to like 2 to even 3,000 milligrams of CBD. So you want to make a recommendation based on strength of CBD, okay, when it comes to hemp-based products. Again, because the effect of the THC is essentially negligible. With hemp-based products, where the amount of the THC is not negligible is when the patient is consuming, when the product it doesn't have non-detectable levels of THC. It does have some amount of THC in it, albeit less than 0.3%, but there's an absolute value of THC in the product, right? And so if the patient is consuming, like for instance, I don't know, a half to 3/4 of the bottle, then they will get a psychoactive effect, even though it's less than 0.3%. So that's something people forget, or they just don't know. Now, when it comes to marijuana-based products, the recommendations that you make are based on ratios of CBD and THC. So you'll find a wide variety of ratios. You'll find marijuana-based products that are high in CBD. You'll find marijuana-based products that are high in THC. And you'll find marijuana-based products that have equal amounts of CBD and THC. And then a whole range of ratios of CBD and THC in between, okay? So for the conditions that I mentioned, high CBD is what matters, okay? So it doesn't matter if it's a marijuana-based product or a hemp-based product, as long as it has high enough of an amount of CBD, that's what you need at the end of the day. And you want the amount of THC to be essentially negligible for these conditions. Same with the conditions where it's the THC that benefits. So for instance, with nausea, vomiting, poor appetite, you want really, really high amounts of THC. So, that's what you want to look for there. And then, like, for instance, with autoimmune conditions, what my patients found effective was approximately equal amounts of CBD and THC, okay? So a lot of this was, for me, something I learned over the course of time in treating patients, and then also just keeping up with the research as well, and paying close attention to the methods section of research studies, which nobody pays attention to look at exactly what formulations they used and in what amounts they use the formulations as well. So that's a general overview of what to pay attention to when it comes to strengths of products, whether it's hemp-based or marijuana-based.
So what about strains in terms of like indica or any other like type of plant that's used? Do you need to pay attention to that?
No, it's not objective. A lot of it is just, honestly, at the end of the day, marketing more than anything else. I mean, you have like ridiculous names, like strain names like Girl Scout Cookie and Purple Urkel and, something train wreck. And so those names are more marketing than anything else. Because if you think about it this way, I mean, first of all, it's not an objective measure, right? The amounts, the ratios that you're looking at, that is an objective measure. They're using basically liquid chromatography essentially to figure out the amounts of the various different cannabinoids in the product. But at one point, the names, the general names, indica and sativa, did carry significance, but we started to breed plants. And so you no longer have these two general strains that are very, very different. You have a lot of like, because of the breeding. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I think the names aren't as important as the percentages. Plus, the other point that I wanted to make is that, say you go to one dispensary and pick up like purple Urkel one time, and then you go again and pick up purple Urkel, you're going to get a different effect. Because oftentimes what happens is that a lot of these growers, and I've talked to some of them, they'll just like name the strain arbitrarily. Like, oh yeah, this smells like a purple Urkel to me, or it looks like a purple Urkel. And it's like, what is purple Urkel? Like, what sort of like criteria do you have to call it purple Urkel? And they don't, you know. So so I wouldn't go by the names at all.
And then harvesting can, conditions and factors may
Yes.
influence, from one batch to the next, like the potency of each plant. So that's why you're testing each batch.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
That makes sense. So let's say somebody does need some THC in addition to CBD for their condition. How do you get them tolerant without experiencing any negative, side effects from the THC or any kind of psychosis or paranoia?
Yeah, so essentially it's a titration process, right? So once you figure out the right, determine the right ratio that's going to be appropriate for them, then it's a matter of figuring out at what amount to start them at. On average, I don't tend to start patients at more than 1 milligram of THC, and this is based on research on synthetics, so isomers and analogs of THC, where they found that with synthetics, once they got to like 10 to 15 milligrams of THC, that's when the psychoactive effect started to kick in. And so you'll notice I'm taking a very conservative approach, because you can probably push that up even higher with plant-based THC and the other cannabinoids that are along with it, because like I mentioned, CBD tends to dampen the side effects of THC. But yeah, I take a very conservative approach, and then essentially it's a titration process. That's the basic fundamental approach that I take.
Yeah, that makes sense. They have synergy and protective effects when it's the whole plant rather than isolates, for sure. So what are your favorite dosage forms to start people on?
Okay, so a lot of that's going to depend on the condition, right? So for sleep, especially for patients who have difficulty staying asleep, edibles are the best because the duration of action is the longest. We're looking at anywhere from 6 to 12 hours. And that duration, it's not like the person's going to feel drowsy for up to 12 hours. You can adjust that with the dosing. As long as they're taking the right dose, it's usually about 6 to 8 hours, I would say, in terms of duration of action. For anybody who experiences like migraines and or like breakthrough pain and they need immediate relief, I would say inhalation is the best form, not smoking, but vaporizing. And vaporizing vape oils. And of course, I always advise them to make sure that the vape oil isn't made with any contaminants like vitamin E acetate or like mineral oil, because we've seen the effect that can have on the lungs. And advise them to purchase vape oils that are made from carbon dioxide. And then let's see, sublinguals I found work great for patients who've had gastric bypass surgeries, for instance, because they have a more difficult time absorbing edibles. So it really depends on the medical history and also just logistics, right? So for the patients with autism that I've treated, with those patients, sublingual formulations, it's difficult to get a child to hold a tincture under the tongue for like 60 to 90 seconds. So for them, like edibles. So it varies quite a bit based on just medical history overall.
And so do you have edibles as part of your line?
We do. We just got some gummies, and they're 25 milligrams each, but they can, I always tell people that you don't have to take the whole gummy. You can always cut it up into smaller pieces, and don't pop the gummy like it's regular, candy. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to thank you so much for sharing your journey with us and all your extensive knowledge about this amazing plant. Do you have just a few more minutes for some rapid fire questions?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. What's the number one thing people can do right now to improve their quality of life?
Work on your mindset. That is one thing I work on every morning, and it can make the biggest impact in your life. Because the one thing you always carry with you are your thoughts, and knowing that you can choose your thoughts changes your life.
I love that.
Yeah.
Also, what is your in your mind? What is the ideal healthcare system look like?
Oh God.
Just quick.
Okay. All right. Ideally, if I could, I'd provide free medical care. That's always been my hope and desire, especially when I went to Africa and when I went to India. It's a service. You know, we're really doing a service. And I remember when I was like intubating patients in the emergency room, it's almost like you were this outer body experience where it was like God was working through me. It's difficult to explain, but you know, here's this person hanging on to their life, and you are in this position of being able to help them breathe by putting this tube into their throat, and just the experience of that. So I would, yeah, it's a work of God. You know, you're working through the hands of God, and so I would do it if I could. I would do it for free.
I love that so much. It's
Yeah.
like all your training all of a sudden kicks in when you need it, and you just do fight or flight, and you just do your work, and then you feel like this is what needed to be done.
Yeah.
Okay, so next question won't be as drastic. What's your favorite hobby or pastime?
Going for walks. Either that or yoga. But walks just, they're like a life source for me.
I love that too.
Yeah.
What's your favorite beverage to drink?
Right now, I always like to flavor my water, and I'm always trying different things. But right now, I'm on an emergency powder kick. So that's what I'm on right now.
Your immunity, that's always good.
Yeah.
Especially now.
And the vitamins too. I feel like the vitamins are making me feel really good.
It's like a multivitamin plus extra vitamin C.
The only thing I don't like about it is I usually consume about like 4 packets, and that's about 20 grams of sugar. So I'm trying to find a version that doesn't have as much sugar in it. So if any of your audience members know, they should.
I'll look up later. I'll give you some herbal alternatives.
Oh, great.
All right. And lastly, how can our listeners get to know you more or get in touch with you?
Absolutely. You can visit our website at docpatels.com. DOC, you probably know how to spell Patel because there's so many Dr. Patels, but it's Patel, and then there's an S at the end. So docpatels.com, I have a lot of medical information. I have a writer who posts business information as well on how to incorporate CBD products into your practice. And then if you want to reach out to me personally, you can just email me at dr.rachna, RACHNA, Patel, PATEL, at docpatels.com.
Awesome. So I'll have all of that in our show notes, especially the part about your book, and, you know, we'll just keep in touch.
Perfect. Yeah,
awesome.
Sounds great.
Thank you so much again for your time.
Yep.
Have a good one. Bye.
You too. Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Rawfork podcast, and I truly hope that you enjoyed it and learned something from it. If you did enjoy it, please don't hesitate to leave us a 5-star rating and a short, sweet review so that other listeners can find us across podcast platforms. To get in touch with me, you can go to rawfork.com or email me directly at marina@rawfork.com. Thank you, and I hope to see you back here next week.